When you analyze a business merger or, a corporate acquisition, there is this underlying expectation of absolute precision.
Right, like it's engineering.
Exactly. You pull up a spreadsheet, you isolate the bottom line, you spot that glaring, undeniable red negative number, and the CEO just points at it and says, there it is. Cut it.
Because it's entirely binary. It's math, you know?
Yeah.
The logic is impenetrable because the numbers, well, they don't have feelings, they don't have aspirations, and they certainly don't have a pulse.
Spot on. Profitable or unprofitable. It's a clean, sterile environment. But then if you take that same calculated corporate mindset and you force it into the messy world of human relationships,
Whoa, it's a disaster.
it really is.
Yeah.
You introduce passion, you introduce ego, and frankly, in the case of what we're unpacking for you today, I'll introduce a literal struggle for physical survival.
Yeah, suddenly that spreadsheet is totally useless.
Exactly. The calculator is
Yeah.
broken, the engineered precision completely collapses, and you're left looking at a dynamic that is murky, violent, and just defies every single rule of logic.
It becomes the absolute definition of relational and psychological muddy waters. I mean, you were watching the collision of two entirely incompatible ecosystems.
And that is exactly the collision we are exploring for you today. Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. We are jumping straight into the fascinating, incredibly turbulent waters of the 2026 Russian melodrama series, Sea of Lies, or FIO.
Such a wild ride of a series.
It really is. Now, to get the absolute clearest picture for you, we aren't just skimming a Wikipedia summary here. We've compiled a massive stack of research.
Yeah, the real deep cuts.
Right. We are pulling from the detailed series breakdowns on kinoteater.hu. We are looking at the critical reception on film.uo, which, by the way, is fascinating because it holds this wildly polarizing 4.4 IMDb score against a really solid 7.273 on Kinoteater.
That disparity alone tells you how provocative the show is.
Absolutely. We have episode tracking data, and crucially, we have the comprehensive audio transcripts that give us the exact word-for-word dialogue from the most pivotal moments of the series.
And those transcripts, I mean, they are the Rosetta Stone for this deep dive. They allow us to bypass the surface-level romantic tropes and really examine the psychological architecture of these characters.
Yeah, we get to see not just what they do, but the exact language they use to justify their actions.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the core mission for you today. We are strictly analyzing the complex, incredibly layered relationship between the two main characters, Mila Bugrova and Sergei Stoletov.
We are tracing two massive intertwining threads here.
Right. First, how their professional collaboration perfectly highlights their entirely opposite approaches to the travel industry, and by extension, to the fundamental question of how to assign value to a human life.
It's a huge philosophical clash.
It really is. And second, we are tracking the wild, violent shift in their power dynamic. I mean, how do they go from this rigid, wealthy CEO and starry-eyed subordinate hierarchy to becoming literal equals, fighting for their lives against a criminal syndicate in a foreign country?
It is an incredible, harrowing arc. And to really understand the destination, we have to start at the absolute beginning, the genesis of their conflict.
Yeah, they definitely don't meet cute at a coffee shop.
No, not at all. They collide over a failing profit and loss statement.
So let's set the stage and introduce the players. First, we have Sergei Stoletov. He is presented as a highly pragmatic, 31 or 32-year-old businessman.
Right, the guy in the bespoke suits.
Exactly. He is the owner of the travel agency, Zip Travel, which is actually just one small asset within a much larger corporate holding company that he inherited.
And when we first meet him, he is a man who strictly looks at numbers.
He really is. He pulls the financial report for Zip Travel, sees a high unprofitability ratio, sees the negative margins bleeding into his holdings' overall valuation, and just makes a cold, calculated decision. Shut the business down, fire everyone, liquidate the assets.
Sergei is basically the embodiment of modern corporate fatigue. I mean, he is surrounded by pressure.
Yeah, especially from his family.
Right. He has a sister, Susanna, who is a major shareholder in this hoarding company, and she is constantly reinforcing this bottom line mentality.
So when Sergei looks at the travel agency, he doesn't see vacations.
No, he doesn't see happy families or honeymooners or, the intrinsic value of rest. He sees a hemorrhaging organ that needs to be surgically removed to save the host body.
That's a brutal way to put it, but it's true. He views the employees as acceptable collateral damage in a broader financial maneuver.
And sitting completely on the opposite end of the spectrum is Mila Bugrova.
Right, our counterforce. She's a 28-year-old, dreamy, incredibly enthusiastic travel agent.
And the transcripts note she has only been working at Zip Travel for 3 months.
Just 3 months. But she isn't just clocking in and selling plane tickets. She is obsessed with the experience of travel. She lives for it, even though, and this is a crucial detail for you to keep in mind, she has never actually been abroad herself.
That detail is the master key to understanding Mila. I mean, she is selling a dream that she herself is desperately waiting to live.
It gives her sales pitch a kind of religious fervor, doesn't it?
It really does. She isn't selling a commodity. She is selling salvation from the mundane.
Which leads to their first massive confrontation. Sergei walks into the office ready to execute the liquidation. He literally says, this ship cannot be saved. It's easier to sink it with the crew.
It's such a violent, dismissive metaphor.
It is, but Mila pushes back fiercely. She stands up to the CEO, a man who holds her livelihood in his hands, and says, even in 3 months, you can understand that in business, the main thing is people.
The writers perfectly establish their opposing life philosophies right here, using the travel industry as the battleground.
Yeah, for Sergei, the travel agency is a cell on an Excel spreadsheet. If the number is red, you highlight the cell and you press delete.
But for Mila, the agency is a vehicle for human connection. Their debate isn't actually about business strategy at all. It's about ontology.
Wait, ontology?
Yeah, it's about how to assign value to human endeavor. Sergei values capital and efficiency. Mila values experience and authenticity.
And we actually get to see Mila's philosophy in action, which I love. There's this fantastic scene in the transcripts where she is on the phone with a client.
Yeah.
The client wants to go to Antalya, Turkey.
Right. A super popular destination.
Very popular.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about the mechanics of the modern travel economy, a lazy agent, or frankly a booking algorithm, would just click on page 1 of the digital catalog and book them into a massive, generic, all-inclusive mega resort. Process the transaction, take the commission, move on.
But Mila refuses to do that.
She completely refuses. She tells the client, this is not the Antalya you see in the first catalog you come across. Instead, she pitches them Caputa speech.
Oh, I love how she describes that.
It's so vivid. She describes how it's wild, how you have to descend this steep, secret staircase hidden between the rocks, and how you suddenly find yourself in a completely different, untouched world.
She is actively fighting against the commodification of travel. In a world where every experience is packaged, shrink-wrapped, and sold at a volume discount, she is insisting on the bespoke, the emotional, the difficult to reach.
Which is amazing, but you have to realize that philosophy is a direct ideological threat to Sergei's worldview.
Oh, absolutely. Sergei's entire corporate structure relies on commodification and predictability. Mila introduces friction. She introduces variables that just cannot be quantified on his spreadsheet.
I see what you're saying, but I have to push back here for a second. Let's look at this from a strictly pragmatic, real-world standpoint. Mila is a 3-month employee.
Right.
She pitches this idea to save the company by collaborating with travel bloggers to offer virtual customized tours. And she specifically wants to use her online boyfriend, Dennis Alamov, who lives in Turkey, as the influencer.
Yeah, her internet boyfriend.
Exactly. In what world does a seasoned, cynical CEO listen to a junior employee pitching her internet boyfriend as a corporate savior and not just laugh her out of the room?
It's a fair question.
I mean, he doesn't fire her. He makes her the head of a brand new department. Is Sergei actually convinced by the economic viability of this influencer strategy? Or is he just a guy instantly smitten by a beautiful, passionate woman yelling at him?
Well, it is an entirely fair critique of his business acumen in that moment, and the answer is absolutely both.
Both.
Yeah, but you have to look at the profound psychological deficit Sergei is operating under. Yes, there is an immediate, visceral, personal attraction, but look at his exact words from the transcript when they are later celebrating her new role.
What does he say?
He tells her that when he looks at her, when he sees her burning eyes, she reminds him of his younger self.
His younger self. That implies he wasn't always a spreadsheet robot.
Exactly. He is a man who has spiritually died in the boardroom. He has spent years surrounded by people like his sister Susanna, people who only speak the language of profit margins and shareholder value.
So he's suffocating in cynicism.
Yes. And then Mila walks in. She is this burst of pure, uncorrupted vitality. She reminds him of why he got into the tourism business in the first place, back before he became a cynical operator.
Oh, wow.
He isn't just attracted to her physically. He is magnetically drawn to her life force. He wants to absorb it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Furthermore, if we analyze her strategy objectively, it actually is sound. In a 2026 market that is completely saturated with generic package holidays, her idea of partnering with localized influencers for personalized, authentic content is a highly modern, connection-driven approach.
It perfectly counters this sterile corporate strategy that was actively failing him.
Exactly. It is a genuinely good idea, but it is supercharged by the fact that it's presented by a captivating person who makes him feel alive again.
It's like she acts as a defibrillator for his passion. She shocks his heart back into rhythm regarding his own life's work.
That's a great way to put it.
And I'm sure you listening have seen this exact dynamic in your own career.
Yeah.
You start out with all this Mila energy. You want to innovate. You want to focus on the human element. You have these grand ideals about your industry.
We all start there.
We really do. And then 5 or 10 years later, the corporate machine has ground you down, and you find yourself making Sergei decisions just trying to keep the budget out of the red and the board of directors off your back. It is a universal tension.
And it is the exact tension that forms the bedrock of their entire relationship, because here is where the friction really starts.
Right, because his actions don't match her philosophy.
Even though Sergei respects her business plan enough to fund it and promote her, his approach to actually pursuing her romantically completely ignores her philosophy.
It really does. When it comes to dating, he falls right back on his default corporate setting. He relies on a wildly outdated, heavily unbalanced power dynamic.
Which brings us to the mechanics of their early courtship and how Sergei tries to leverage his position. It is incredibly heavy-handed.
Oh, it's painful to watch. He doesn't ask her out for coffee to discuss their shared interests. He leverages his wealth and his status immediately.
Yeah, he sends a massive, ostentatiously expensive bouquet of flowers directly to her home.
Along with a note essentially summoning her to a high-end, exclusive restaurant called Atlas.
It's a pure power play. If you analyze the mechanics of this, he isn't asking her out as a peer, he's issuing a directive.
Yeah, he assumes that his status as a wealthy, single CEO makes him an irresistible, undeniable catch.
He is treating the courtship the exact same way he treats his corporate acquisitions. He spots an asset he wants, he assesses its market value, and he attempts to acquire it by overwhelming it with sheer capital force.
It's a hostile takeover. If we apply mergers and acquisitions tactics to human dating, this is a textbook hostile takeover.
It really is.
He is trying to acquire Mila through aggressive investing. First, the sudden promotion, then the luxury flowers, then the high society dinner.
He is trying to make her feel indebted to him, to create a sunk cost where she feels she owes him her time and affection.
And the brilliance of Mila's character is that she instantly recognizes the mechanics of this hostile takeover, and she completely rejects the premise of the acquisition.
She doesn't just politely decline either.
No, she is fierce. When she confronts him about the flowers and the dinner invitation, she tells him straight to his face that she cares about people, not his money, and certainly not his flowers.
The transcripts show her expressing this deep, existential fear of becoming just another pretty fool to a rich businessman.
She refuses to be a depreciating asset on his balance sheet. She knows that if she accepts that dinner, she validates his hypothesis that money can buy her compliance.
Precisely. The narrative structure here is taking one of the oldest tropes in romantic melodrama, the wealthy boss and the naive, starry-eyed employee, and completely subverting it.
Usually in your standard soap opera, the boss's wealth is the ultimate prize, right?
Exactly. The entire narrative conflict usually revolves around whether the employee is worthy of accessing that wealth. But Sea of Lies flips the script.
Sergei assumes his status is his greatest asset. Mila explicitly views it as a massive, glaring red flag.
She possesses a high level of emotional intelligence. She recognizes the inherent danger of the dynamic. I mean, if she accepts his romantic advances while he literally holds her career, her new promotion, and her entire financial stability in his hands, she is voluntarily sacrificing her agency.
She would be utterly structurally dependent on him.
Yes!
And what makes Mila's resistance so compelling is that she isn't just fighting Sergei's corporate pressure at the office. She's fighting a two-front war. We have to dive into the psychology of her mother, Olga Mikhailovna.
Olga.
Yeah, because the mother acts as the ruthless enforcer of this traditional patriarchal power dynamic right inside Mila's own home.
Olga is a fascinating psychological study in generational trauma and the prioritization of survival over fulfillment.
When that massive bouquet arrives at their apartment, the mother is ecstatic.
Oh, she is thrilled. She tells Mila that Sergei is rich, handsome, and single, and she genuinely cannot compute why Mila is resisting this.
For Olga, stability, financial security, and upward social mobility are the paramount, unquestionable virtues of a marriage.
She views Mila's dreams of travel, independence, and romantic equality as dangerous, childish nonsense.
It's the classic clash between the mindset of scarcity and the mindset of abundance. The mother has likely spent her life worrying about money, so when a walking bank account sends flowers to her daughter, she sees it as a winning lottery ticket.
And it gets so extreme that it turns violent.
It does. When the mother finds out that Mila is secretly planning to fly to Turkey to meet her blogger boyfriend Dennis, which, by the way, Mila's paying for entirely with her own hard-earned money, the mother physically intercepts her.
She takes Mila's passport and she literally shreds it into 1,000 pieces.
I couldn't believe that scene.
You have to understand the logistical and emotional violence of that act. Shredding a passport isn't just tearing up a piece of paper. It is a deliberate, calculated destruction of Mila's autonomy.
Getting a passport requires time, bureaucracy, and money.
Exactly. By destroying it, the mother is violently trying to trap Mila in Moscow. She is trying to force her daughter back onto the logical path of marrying the wealthy boss.
Olga is completely willing to sacrifice her daughter's actual happiness and freedom on the altar of financial safety.
It's suffocating.
Mila is trapped by Sergei's capital at work and trapped by her mother's desperation at home. And the irony is, Sergei's power isn't even absolute.
Right, he acts like a king, but he's actually a middle manager in his own life.
We get this vital context from the sources about his sister, Susanna. As the main shareholder of the holding company, Susanna sees what Sergei is doing with the travel agency and Mila, and she confronts him.
She warns him about getting involved with this sinking ship of an agency just to impress a girl. She tells him not to play the savior.
And she uses this brilliant cultural reference. She calls him a naive Buratino burying coins in the field of miracles.
That is a phenomenal piece of dialogue. For context, Buratino is the Russian equivalent of Pinocchio. In the fairy tale, Buratino is tricked by a fox and a cat into burying his gold coins in the field of miracles, believing that a money tree will grow overnight. Of course, the scammers just dig up the coins and steal them while he sleeps.
So by calling Sergei a naive Buratino, Susanna is highlighting his immense blind spots.
She is pointing out that he is playing the omnipotent boss, throwing capital around to impress Mila, but in reality, he is a fool being led by his ego.
He is beholden to a board, to stakeholders, to the cold reality of the market. His power is a fragile facade, which perfectly foreshadows his eventual fall.
So Sergei's power is an illusion, but to Mila, the cage feels incredibly real. She's being boxed in from all sides.
And when you corner an animal, it doesn't negotiate. It looks for the nearest exit, even if that exit is dangerous, which is exactly why she turns to her alternative, Denis Alimov.
Let's really analyze Dennis. Why is Mila so intensely drawn to this guy she only knows through a screen?
It's not just that he's a handsome guy living in a sunny locale. It is the specific psychological archetype he represents. Dennis is a travel blogger living in Turkey.
To Mila, who is suffocating under corporate control and maternal pragmatism, Dennis represents the ultimate pure escape. He promises freedom. He promises to explore the world with her.
And crucially, look at his vocabulary in the transcripts. He uses the word team. He tells her, "We are a team."
That single word is the lever that moves Mila's entire world. Mila is making a choice based on a fundamental human desire for agency.
She is choosing what she believes is an equal partnership over the gilded cage that Sergei is offering.
Sergei offers her a kingdom, but the implicit contract is that she must be his subject. Dennis appears to offer her an open road where they are co-pilots, sharing the navigation.
It's a tragic irony, of course, given the horrific reality of what Dennis actually is.
Yeah, but her motivation in choosing him is entirely pure. It is rooted in a desperate need for equality.
Right. And she reaches her absolute breaking point with Sergei. He has essentially backed her into a corner. He implies that if she leaves the company, he will execute his original plan, fire everyone, and shut the agency down.
The guilt of her coworkers losing their jobs is placed squarely on her shoulders.
But if she stays, she can run the new strategy under his watchful romantic eye. It's a lose-lose scenario. So she decides to reject the entire game board.
To truly break this uneven power dynamic, Mila realizes that simply saying no is insufficient. Her mother shredded her passport. Sergei is threatening her colleagues' livelihoods. She cannot negotiate her way out.
She has to take drastic physical action.
And she does.
First, she officially rejects Sergei's business offer. In the transcript, she tells him to keep the travel strategy for free because in Moscow, everyone chases money, there is no soul.
She intellectually uncouples from him.
Then, because her mother has literally locked the door to their apartment to prevent her from leaving, Mila opens her bedroom window. She climbs out of the window and shimmies down an exterior air conditioning unit to escape.
It is a visceral, incredibly dangerous physical escape from control.
And thanks to a new, suspiciously rushed passport that Dennis somehow arranged for her, she flies to Izmir, Turkey, to finally be with him.
The precise moment she steps out of that window, the entire narrative paradigm of Sea of Lies violently shifts. While Mila is assaulting her physical freedom, Sergei's role completely inverts.
He is no longer the CEO sitting behind a massive oak desk, dictating terms and sending flowers.
When he finds out she's gone, and it's actually Mila's mother who comes to his office in an absolute panic to tell him she climbed out the window, Sergei drops everything.
The corporate veneer shatters, and he becomes a desperate investigator. He immediately tasks his head of security, Timonin, to dig into Denis Alamov.
And what Timonin finds is chilling.
Denis is not some carefree, adventurous travel blogger. The persona is a complete fabrication.
Denis is a fraud with a long, documented history of being involved in consummation scams.
We need to break down exactly how a consummation scam works, because it reveals the depth of Denis's predatory nature.
Yeah, in tourist hotspots, a consummation racket is a highly organized financial crime. It usually involves a spotter, a lure, and muscle.
Denis would use women, the sources specifically mention a woman named Aglaya who was previously involved with him, to act as the lure.
The woman goes on dating apps, finds wealthy male tourists, and invites them to a specific, seemingly normal bar or restaurant.
But the establishment is in on the scam.
Exactly. The woman orders drinks, the man assumes he's buying a few cocktails, but when the bill arrives, it is astronomically inflated. We're talking thousands of dollars for cheap liquor.
And if the man refuses to pay?
The doors are locked and the muscle appears. Denis was intimately involved in this underworld. He is a professional manipulator who grooms women for financial exploitation.
Which instantly reframes the whole passport situation. When Mila's mother shredded her passport, Denis somehow managed to procure a rushed replacement passport for her in record time.
Initially, Mila sees this as a heroic act of love from her teammate.
But when you understand Denis is tied to organized crime, that rushed passport becomes a massive, glaring red flag. He wasn't just being a helpful boyfriend. He was utilizing underground logistical networks to smuggle a human asset across international borders.
It is the central, devastating narrative irony of this entire deep dive. Think about the mechanics of what just happened.
Right.
The exact moment Mila takes back her power, the moment she exercises her ultimate agency to climb down that AC unit and flee to Turkey for freedom and equality, she inadvertently walks directly into a trap that will systematically strip her of every single ounce of human rights she possesses.
She escapes a metaphorical financial cage in Moscow, only to walk into a literal physical cage in Izmir.
It's terrifying, but what is equally fascinating is the mechanical parallel happening back in Moscow.
Simultaneously, as Mila is losing her physical freedom in Turkey, Sergei is systematically losing his corporate power.
The sources lay the mechanics of this out very clearly. Sergei's holding company is in a vulnerable position, and he is supposed to have a massive make-or-break meeting with an investment banker representing the Dar Fund, a woman named Evgenia.
This meeting is crucial for the survival and restructuring of his assets.
But because Sergei is frantically trying to track Mila's phone and coordinate with his security team to figure out where she landed, he completely skips the meeting.
He abdicates his throne. He abandons his post at the most critical juncture in his company's history.
And nature, especially corporate nature, absolutely abhors a vacuum. By skipping that meeting to focus on a personal crisis, he leaves the door wide open.
His sister, Susanna, who we know is strictly focused on the bottom line, and Evgenia from the Dar Fund, see his absence as a massive liability.
They use the opportunity to maneuver behind his back, initiating a corporate takeover that will dilute his shares and strip him of his majority control.
Okay, hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here, because we need to critically examine Sergei's motives in this moment.
Okay.
He is having his security guy, Timonin, track Mila's cell phone using police connections to ping the towers in Turkey.
Right.
He is aggressively confronting her mother.
Mm.
Is his pursuit of her in this moment genuinely heroic, or is it bordering on obsessive and controlling? Because tracking someone's phone without their permission, especially an employee who just quit, is intense. You could argue he's just furious that an asset slipped through his fingers.
That is the exact tension the writers want you to feel. It is intense, and the narrative walks a razor-thin line.
Yeah.
Initially, you absolutely could argue that his ego is bruised. He is a man used to getting what he wants, and Mila defied him. However, the transcripts reveal a definitive, undeniable shift in his psychology.
What causes the shift?
There is a specific scene where Mila, who's already trapped in Turkey, is forced by Dennis to call her mother to pretend everything is fine. Sergei is in the apartment, listening in on the call.
Mila's trying to sound happy, talking about the weather and the sights, but she repeatedly uses the phrase, mommy.
And the mother immediately flags it. Even though she's been terrible to Mila, a mother's instinct kicks in. She turns to Sergei and says, "She never calls me mommy." It is a coded distress signal.
Precisely. And the psychological shift in Sergei happens the millisecond he hears that safe word. All pretense of corporate strategy, all the bruised ego, all the desire to acquire her vanishes.
His motivation shifts entirely from, "I need to possess this woman," to, "This human being is in mortal danger and I have to save her."
The tracking is no longer about control. It is about sheer survival logistics. He abandons his company, he abandons his wealth, because his internal hierarchy of needs has fundamentally realigned.
I want to relate this directly to you listening right now. Have you ever experienced a moment where the entire architecture of your daily life just vanished?
Think about a time when you got a phone call about a family emergency or a sudden health crisis with someone you love.
Think about whatever was on your desk at that moment. A major presentation, a huge quarterly deadline, an argument with a coworker. Think about how instantly meaningless all those emails and spreadsheets felt.
The absolute evaporation of your professional ego in the face of physical reality. That is the exact psychological pivot Sergei makes when he hears the word mommy. He finally internalizes the lesson Mila tried to teach him in episode 1. The main thing is people.
And that profound realization sets him on a collision course with the darkest, most intense part of our deep dive. Because when Sergei finally secures a flight and arrives in Turkey, the old rules of their relationship, the boss, the subordinate, the wealth disparity, are completely obliterated by the sheer brutality of their environment.
Which brings us to the crucible in Turkey and the transition from a hierarchy to true equals. We need to detail the reality of what is actually happening to Mila because it is horrific.
Dennis isn't just running a consummation scam anymore. He has graduated to a much darker level of the criminal underworld.
He is working for a powerful local crime boss named Yusuf Bursin. The sources reveal that Yusuf's wife, Pinar, cannot have children.
Because surrogacy is strictly regulated or illegal in the context of this universe, Yusuf has orchestrated a terrifying black market solution.
He is utilizing Dennis's network to kidnap vulnerable foreign women to use as forced surrogates.
It is human trafficking of the most intimate, physically invasive kind. Dennis groomed Mila and lured her to Izmir specifically for this purpose.
The mechanics of the operation are chilling. They poison her drink. She loses consciousness and wakes up in a sterile hospital room that is, in reality, a prison cell.
She is informed that she will carry Yusuf's child.
While she is trapped in this medical facility, she meets another Russian captive, a woman named Rita. Through Rita, Mila and the audience realizes the terrifying depth and institutional organization of this criminal enterprise.
This isn't just a couple of thugs in a basement. There are armed guards, there are corrupt doctors violating the Hippocratic Oath, there are bribes being paid to local officials.
It is an inescapable systemic nightmare designed to break a person's psyche.
But the crucial character beat here is that Mila does not break.
Not at all.
Even when she processes the ultimate betrayal, the realization that the man she thought loved her, the teammate she crossed borders for, actually sold her body to a crime syndicate, she maintains her core agency.
She doesn't succumb to despair. She actively tries to escape, she fights back against the orderlies, and she uses her knowledge of the Turkish language, which she studied out of pure passion for travel, to gather intelligence on her captors.
She is surviving. And then Sergei arrives.
Through Timonin's intel, he has tracked Dennis down. He orchestrates a chaotic rescue.
But the absolute climax of this sequence, the moment that permanently redefines who they are to each other, happens when they are on the run.
Sergei and Mila flee into the mountains of Izmir. They are cornered in a remote, abandoned house by a corrupt Turkish police officer who is on Yusuf's payroll.
Let's analyze the mechanics of this specific setting, because the environment itself forces absolute equality between them. It's like taking a deep-sea fish and violently dragging it to the surface.
Wow, what an image.
Down in the corporate depths of Moscow, the immense crushing pressure of Sergei's wealth is what makes him powerful. His entire biology is adapted to that pressure.
He could summon people with flowers. He could end careers with a signature.
But you drag him up to the thin air of sheer physical survival in the Turkish mountains, and all of that pressure vanishes. In this remote house, facing a corrupt cop with a loaded weapon who serves a local crime boss, Sergei's money means absolutely nothing.
His corporate title cannot stop a bullet.
Exactly. He structurally cannot survive using his old tactics. He has to adapt instantly to Mila's level, relying entirely on raw human capability.
The corporate hierarchy is instantly rendered meaningless. Survival depends entirely on mutual trust and the merging of their distinct skill sets.
And we see this play out violently. Sergei provides the physical rescue. He engages in a brutal hand-to-hand fight with the corrupt cop to protect Mila.
During the struggle, the cop is severely injured. He goes down, bleeding out profusely on the floor of this abandoned house.
And this is where Mila steps up to provide the essential moral anchor.
This is the defining philosophical moment of the series.
Yeah.
Because Sergei's instinct, which from a strictly pragmatic survivalist standpoint makes complete sense, is to leave the cop to die.
The man is an active threat who is just trying to murder them. Why save your executioner?
But Mila vehemently refuses. She insists they cannot let him die. She argues that if they leave a man to bleed to death when they have the power to stop it, they become morally indistinguishable from Yusuf and Dennis.
They cross an ethical line they can never come back from.
Earlier in the series, it was casually mentioned that Mila had taken first aid courses. She utilizes that knowledge now. She tears fabric, she applies pressure, she stabilizes the corrupt cop, and actively saves his life.
If we connect this to the overarching theme of the deep dive, Sergei saved her physical body from the hospital, but in this moment, Mila saves his soul.
She prevents him from crossing a moral event horizon.
She insists that they don't just run away. She insists they take the stabilized cop to the legitimate authorities and tell the absolute truth.
And the aftermath of that decision at the local police station is incredibly telling about how systemic power operates. They go to the authorities, and initially the police completely dismiss Mila's story.
Why? Because Yusuf Bursin is a highly respected, wealthy businessman in the community. He has leverage.
Furthermore, Yusuf's people have provided forged hospital documents claiming that Mila is a distressed tourist who is psychiatrically unstable.
It is institutional gaslighting. Yusuf is using the exact same power dynamics that Sergei used back in Moscow: wealth, status, and control over institutions to invalidate Mila's truth. Yusuf is weaponizing the system against her.
But the system breaks down because of Mila's one act of radical empathy.
The corrupt cop, the man whose life she saved in the mountains, breaks his silence.
Confronted by the fact that the woman he was paid to kill just spent an hour keeping him from bleeding to death, he confesses. He admits to the attempted murder, he corroborates Mila's story, and he exposes Yusuf's entire underground surrogacy ring.
Mila's adherence to her principles, her refusal to sacrifice her humanity even in a literal crucible, is the specific mechanism that brings down the syndicate.
Sergei fought the immediate physical battle, but Mila's humanity won the war. They saved each other. They operate as true, undeniable equals.
And you have to recognize that surviving a trauma of that magnitude permanently rewires the architecture of a relationship.
You cannot go back to being the boss and the subordinate after you have literally bled together on the floor of a mountain shack.
The old dynamic is dead. Which brings us to the aftermath and their return home.
Let's look at the new baseline. Mila and Sergei return to Moscow. But Sergei is returning to a reality that has been fundamentally altered in his absence.
While he was in Turkey fighting a physical war for Mila's life, the corporate war we mentioned earlier concluded.
Sergei discovers the devastating extent of his professional ruin. The sources detail the exact math. The Dar Fund, represented by Evgenia, executed their maneuver flawlessly.
They now own 49% of the holding company.
His sister, Susanna, holds 15%. This means Sergei is left with only 36% of the shares. He is now a minority shareholder in his own empire.
He has been effectively legally ousted from executive control of the very company he was ruthlessly trying to protect in episode 1.
The optics of his life are completely changed. He no longer has the massive corner office. He no longer holds the terrifying CEO title. His liquid wealth and his societal influence are vastly diminished.
Susanna actually comes to him and apologizes, realizing she trusted the wrong people at the Dar Fund and got outplayed by Evgenia. But the apology doesn't change the math.
The damage is done. Sergei's kingdom has been thoroughly dismantled.
And it is in this profoundly diminished state, completely stripped of his corporate armor and his societal leverage, that Sergei looks at Mila and proposes to her.
And her reaction is immediate. She instantly says yes. There is no hesitation, no fear of being a pretty fool.
We have to analyze the psychological shift of why this proposal works now, as opposed to his aggressive advances in the very beginning.
In the first episode, a grand gesture from Sergei, the massive bouquet, the luxury restaurant, the sudden promotion, was an exercise of raw power. It was leverage.
He was a wealthy benefactor looking down from above, offering a transaction. But now, having lost his kingdom, he is offering her true, unvarnished partnership.
He is looking her in the eye, standing on completely level ground. The capital is gone. Only the man remains.
But I want to pose a question to you, and I genuinely want the listener to chew on this too. Look at the mechanics of this resolution. Did Sergei really have to lose his entire company, his wealth, and his status for them to be together?
Was his money the actual physical barrier to their love? Or was it purely his attitude that needed to change?
Couldn't he have just learned his lesson in Turkey, come back, kept his 51% majority share, and still been a good husband?
It is the most complex philosophical question the series poses.
And based on the psychological profiles we've built, I would argue that yes, the loss of the empire was a structural necessity.
Really?
Yes, for someone as fiercely independent, deeply idealistic, and principled as Mila, the power imbalance created by his massive wealth and status was insurmountable at that specific time in their lives.
If he had kept the money and the power, she could never be entirely 100% sure if she was choosing him for the man he was, or if she was simply yielding to the overwhelming gravity of his capital.
She had to see the man completely separated from the bespoke suits and the corner office. He had to be forcibly stripped of his corporate pragmatism so he could fully, desperately embrace her worldview.
Losing the company wasn't just a plot twist. It was the necessary sacrifice, the burnt offering, required to prove that he finally understood what truly mattered.
He lost his wealth, but he gained his humanity.
That is a brilliant distillation. He had to lose his spreadsheet to find his soul. And I think that is a profound reflection point for you listening right now. Take a moment and think about the architecture of your own relationships, both professional and personal.
How often do titles, the size of a salary, the neighborhood someone lives in, or the societal expectations attached to their job get in the way of seeing who a person truly is?
How often do we let a resume or a LinkedIn profile completely obscure the human being underneath it?
We all build these elaborate structures around ourselves. We build them for protection, we build them for status, we build them to signal our worth to the world.
But the tragic irony is that often those very defensive structures are exactly what prevent true, authentic connection from occurring.
Sergei and Mila had to burn their structures to the ground metaphorically in the boardrooms of Moscow and quite literally in the mountains of Turkey to actually find each other.
It is an incredible journey. Let's take a breath and look at the massive arc we just traversed. We started with a deeply jaded, numbers-obsessed CEO and a starry-eyed, passionate travel agent clashing over a profit and loss statement.
We watched the CEO attempt a hostile romantic takeover, trying to acquire her through aggressive, unbalanced courtship.
We saw the subordinate take drastic physical action to escape that control, inadvertently walking into a terrifying, highly organized criminal nightmare in a foreign country.
We witnessed the boss abandon his entire empire to save her, leading to a brutal crucible where all titles and wealth were stripped away, leaving only two vulnerable human beings relying entirely on each other's empathy to survive.
And finally, we saw them find true, equitable love only after the corporate hierarchy that originally separated them was completely, permanently destroyed.
It is a narrative that fundamentally asks us to deeply question how we calculate value, both in our businesses and in our personal lives.
And that brings me to a final, provocative thought I want to leave you with, something to mull over long after you finish listening. We have talked extensively today about how Sergei's power had to be dismantled in order for him and Mila to operate as equals.
But turn that lens on your own life. Think about the power dynamics you participate in every day.
This is true. Authentic partnership always require the dismantling of unequal power structures first. Can a boss and a subordinate, or any two people operating with vastly different levels of societal, financial, or institutional power, ever truly fall in love without one of them losing their title?
Or is absolute equality a strict, non-negotiable prerequisite for genuine love?
That is a phenomenal, difficult question to ponder. Because usually when we look at a relationship, we want that clean, simple narrative. We want to be able to look at a couple and just say, well, it's just love.
But as we've seen deeply today, the waters are always murky, the spreadsheets are never the whole story, and the power dynamics are always constantly in play until you actively choose to deconstruct them.
Thank you so much for joining us on this custom deep dive into Sea of Lies. We encourage you to keep questioning the underlying dynamics in the stories you consume, and, more importantly, in the reality of your own lives. Until next time.